Hi, everyone. Welcome to MBA Waves. We are on the air. MBA Waves is the live interactive vidcast talking all things MBA every week on LinkedIn Live and Facebook Live and YouTube Live. And it's founded by MBA and GMAT coaching professionals who coach and consult people seeking entry into the powerful world of MBA holders. I'm Bara Sapir, and I'll be moderating today, and I'm joined by Krithika. And I'm also joined, I'm very excited, by Shelly. And I thought we can each introduce ourselves. Krithika, you can start since you're our guest host today, and then we'll go to Shelly.
Hey Bara, always a pleasure to be here. I'm joining in from India and I'm one of the co-founders at Career Labs, your go-to place for all your career needs. Very, very excited about round two interviews.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Shelly Heinrich from Georgetown McDonough in Washington, D.C. I've been here for almost 9 years. I can't believe it's gone by so fast. But I always enjoy talking to prospective students, helping them think about how to create a competitive application. So I'm looking forward to sharing some tips today.
Okay. And today's episode, we're going to be talking about round two interviews. But before we do that, I have something really special to say, which is that it is it's Shelly's birthday. So
my gosh.
So much for joining us.
Thank you.
I have a few hats. I also got this one. I didn't even get to try to see. This one was pretty. This one actually I could wear to a party probably in the Bay Area.
That's
right?
awesome.
Right. So happy birthday. And what's your big wish this year for your birthday that you can share with us?
And it's funny, my kids today said, "You go to work on your birthday?" And I said, "Welcome to the real world." So yes, we work on our birthdays. What's my big wish? I'm so excited to travel again. I love traveling internationally, even domestically, and obviously much of that was put on pause. So we're going on a cruise in a few weeks, and then probably go to Europe this summer. So that's what I'm most excited about this year.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to travel too. So I wish that for you, and happy birthday, and thank you for joining us. And tell your kids, like it's adulting. Sometimes working on your birthday. Sometimes you can get away with not, but yeah. Great. So let's get started. I just want to talk. I want to hear from both of you. What is the context or purpose of an interview in the entire application process, and how does it benefit the schools, and how does it benefit the applicants?
You mean to go first?
Kelly, you go for it. Yeah.
Perfect. So the interview is a way to get to know you as a person. Before the interview, all we have is what you've submitted on your application. So we have your great resume, your essays, but the interview really personalizes you. And that's so important because the class makeup, the personalities in the cohort make the community. And an MBA is such a community-focused degree that the interview gives us a little window into who you are and what you'll add to the classroom.
Amazing. Yeah. And how does it benefit the applicant?
I think it gives them an opportunity to share what makes them special, share their value proposition. Every school has different essay prompts, and sometimes those essay prompts don't allow them to share exactly their unique selling proposition, as we would call it in business school. And so the interview is a way to do that. The interview is also a way for an applicant to assess the community of the school. So it's, oftentimes a two-way interview. We're interviewing them, they're interviewing the community. And so, it's a great way for them to learn as well.
Cool. Krithika, since you're preparing people for interviews, what about you with this question?
I would say this is the best opportunity for showcasing who they really are. And for some people, especially speaking for international applicants and others, it might be very hard to express and to be very honest, essays don't allow too many words. So, and you are being asked to talk to a particular prompt. So you may not be able to convey everything you've done and show that great personality of yours. So as somebody prepping people for interviews, what I always tell them is if you feel that your application had something missing or you were not able to bring about certain aspect, that is what you would want to focus on the interview. And definitely I would say show yourself up like whom you claim to be on paper. Because if you said that you were like a certain person on the CV, you would want to make sure that that's how you show up, and you want to actually like talk about what made you the person who you are. So I feel interviews are a great opportunity for people to do just that.
Yeah, it also sounds like with both of what you're saying is that because it's a two-way street, it's kind of like a dance. I often refer to
Yeah.
these things like a dance, and that it's not just putting it out there, but the rapport
Yeah.
and the timing and how you engage, like how you can be in alignment, or even if you might say something controversial, to be able to how do you bring up things that are
Mhm. Mhm.
controversial, like if someone is working in an industry, for example, that's not particularly um, positively thought of these days, right? So how would someone bring that up in a way that actually informs the person being interviewed by?
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Cool, thanks for those answers.
Yeah, I think we're trying to envision the person as what are they going to be like a student in the classroom? How are they going to interact with their peers? What are they going to be like as alumni, right? Because we're investing in admitting these people that are going to be with us forever, if you think about it.
Mhm.
And so in that interview, we try to imagine, okay, if they were raising their hand in class and answering a question, or if their peer asked them to do something, or if they're in a team room at 11 p.m. at night trying to get through this project, how are they going to show up? So we're kind of testing that as well.
Interesting. So how can you tell us some ways that you do test that?
Yeah.
Ways that you could.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, first of all, it seems very simple, but preparation for an interview, I think for those of us that have been interviewing for a long time, we can tell if someone has prepared. And if they've prepared well for the interview, then we assume they're going to prepare well for class. They're going to be prepped for case studies. They're going to be ready for interviews with employers. Um, if Georgetown is your dream school, or any other school that you're applying to, if you put forth your best effort, we can tell that, and you're going to show up like that then on the other side. So that we will ask questions like, tell me a time that you've worked in a team when maybe someone wasn't performing or pulling their weight. How did you handle it? Or tell me a time when you had a conflict with a teammate. Also, how did you handle it? So, we try to understand behavioral answers, situations that they've had in the past that they can explain to us that will give us an indication of how they will show up as a person.
So I like how this mirrors what happens in the real world when they probably will be out there recruiting for some top-notch jobs, where they would also have like a behavioral section and other things. So Shelly, would you say that there is like a stress interview part of it, or it's just going to be like a candid conversation like how we are having?
Yeah, we don't want people to stress. Sometimes I've had candidates come into my office and I literally see them like sweating, they're stressed. And my first inclination is like, let's just have a conversation. Like, please don't have this be stressful. We just want to get to know you as a person. I understand though, interviewing is stressful. So no, we're not trying to stress people out, please. We just want to get to know you as a person. And you, at least at Georgetown's case, you wouldn't have been invited to an interview unless you had moved along in the process. So we read first and then we invite to interview. So you can come in with the confidence to know that on paper you already have what it takes. So just relax and have a conversation and get to know us.
I have a barking dog in the background that I'm trying to mute a little bit. It's garbage day. So MBA Waves listeners know that when it's garbage day, one of my foster dogs goes bananas. So you bring up an interesting point. So you're actually doing some of the interviews at Georgetown. Other schools, it might be an alum, right? It might be someone else. But at Georgetown, is it faculty or people that are on staff? Is that typically?
Yeah, so we have admissions team members do interviews. We have second year MBA students doing interviews. We have alumni doing interviews. So we have a whole interviewing bench. One of our goals in the entire admissions process is to reduce biases. And so having a bench of diverse perspectives is really important to us. And, but our admission staff they want to stay in getting to know the candidates. Like if we're not interviewing, we don't really know what's happening in the market, what's happening with candidates, their interest. And so it's important for us to still be very much involved in the process as much as possible.
That makes
So
sense. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Bara. Oh, okay. So I want to discuss about this aspect of how, for example, whether it's a blind interview or a non-blind interview. So is for Georgetown, what is it, Shelley?
Semi-blind. So what does this mean? It means that all of our interviewers have read their resume, but nothing else on their application. So we do want to have some idea of where the applicant's coming from, work, background, enough to have a good conversation and to use the time wisely in the interview. But we don't want our staff prejudged by their GPA, their GMAT or GRE score. If someone had a 780, I don't want my team going in thinking, yep, this is going to be a great interview. They have a 780, like you don't really need to evaluate. Or on the flip side, they have a 580. I don't want them going in thinking, man, they really need to wow me in this interview. Or, so we take all that out of it. We just want to see your resume. And so the notes are a little more objective when we combine them with the rest of your application.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, how does that play into the interviewing process in terms of how should candidates prepare, whether it's a blind interview where, obviously there's no resume or anything given to it versus a non-blind interview where the entire application material can be given, and of course a semi-blind interview. So how do you suggest that applicants prepare for it?
Yep. So assume that anything you might have put in your essay or optional essay or obviously video essay, anything of that, just if there were points that you feel really make you stand out as an applicant, make sure you're weaving those into your answers for the interview, because we won't have the interviewer won't have known them, and maybe that's what makes you very unique. And so make sure you're sharing those things. I think the real part, though, of preparing for an interview is taking a step back and thinking about the no-brainer questions they're going to ask you. So what are the no-brainer questions? It's why an MBA? Why Georgetown? What do you hope to do with your MBA? How have you gotten to know our community? So you should have answers to those questions ready to go, rehearsed, But then whether it's blind, semi-blind, because all schools are different, you should think through your experiences, your professional leadership experiences, and think about those examples that make you shine. What was that leadership experience that sets you apart from all their applicants? And think of 2 or 3 of those so that when you are being asked questions, you make sure that you're using those wow examples as part of your answers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you publish the questions or are those the questions that you just expect that people should expect?
We don't publish our questions, but anytime I'm on any type of info session or chat with students, I always say those 4 questions. They may be asked in different ways, right? So it's the tell me about yourself question, like the TMA why. It could be asked as, why are you interested in an MBA in Georgetown? It could just be, tell me a little bit about yourself and why you're at this point when you're pursuing this degree. So it's different words used to get at the same answer and question. So, but no, we don't officially publish them.
And one takeaway for me from what you said was the 4th question that you asked, which was how have you gotten to know the community?
Yep.
What's your relationship to the community, which I think is really important. And it might be challenging for people that aren't local necessarily, but there's alum, there's probably chapters where people can reach out. And certainly LinkedIn is a great tool to find different people that are working in your field, and you can reach out to them as well.
Yep.
So it makes a lot of sense. Following up with this, what are some of the do's for the interview, and really what are some of the don'ts?
Oh, I love this question. I love the don'ts the best, but we'll start with the do's.
Those are fun.
So prepare for the interview. Okay. So what do I mean by that? One, have what I just mentioned, know the answers to these very basic questions. Think through what sets you apart, those behavioral examples. But stage the interview. So if it's in person, dress for success, right? Make sure you're on time. There's these very simple things, but every round, every month, there's candidates that aren't doing this, right? And so I think it's worthwhile to say, like, dress for success, be on time, be nice to the person that's at the reception table that's taking your interview. Those notes come back to us, to be very honest. Like, I've had people at the front desk say, this candidate was really rude. That all comes back. If you're in a virtual interview space, stage your background. So, for example, I have a blank background-ish. I could have chose to do this interview, and we'll just, you said to keep it, coordinated, but I could have chose to do this, and it's like very messy and chaotic. So think about staging your background. I have done many interviews where people are like this. I kid you not, where they're like this the whole time. So practice your technology beforehand, well-lit space, dress, like you're at an interview, even though you're in person. So all of these things are extremely important. So those are do's. While we're talking about like staging the interview, I want to talk about some don'ts. And we're talking about staging. I have had cats walk across the keyboard in an interview of a candidate. I've had candidates do interviews on their mobile phone where they are on a rotating chair talking to me like this, and I'm getting seasick talking to them in interview. I've had, disco balls going in the background of people. So, just be mindful that you want people focused on you. How else to prepare? Make sure you have a closing statement prepared. And it's a closing statement. So if you're in person, the closing statement should reiterate your interest in the program. It should be with a firm handshake. So, thank you so much for taking this interview. It's been great to meet with you. I just want to let you know that Georgetown is my number one choice. And so if accepted, I look forward to being a student, whatever that answer is, but own the closing in person. But same in a virtual, take that moment to have your closing statement, even if they don't ask you for it. I've always been impressed when people have a closing statement and I can tell they've prepared for it. Also prepare when they ask you about your school, like why Georgetown. I can tell if they've just done very surface level website research versus someone who says, I attended this virtual info session last month, or you did a virtual fair with XYZ organization last year that I attended, or I've spoken with your student ambassadors. All of these things can be done from any country that you live in. You don't need to come to campus. But anytime a candidate tells me those things that they've done, immediately in my mind, I say, okay, they're actually interested. They've taken time to know the program. And so in my mind, it shows they've done better research. So I could go on and on, but those are just some very preliminary do's and some don'ts.
You could give a really juicy don't.
Sorry, I had to ask you, did the disco ball person get in?
Oh my gosh. I can't remember, but I was so distracted by the disco ball that I was like, oh my goodness, what is this? Alcohol bottles in the background too. Like just be very mindful that we're all looking at your background. So just be mindful of that.
You notice I just did a close-up of all of us so that you can't see all of our backgrounds.
Yeah.
So for me, what was the biggest takeaway was like the closing statement. And, to add to that, I'll also say that this is a great opportunity for people to ask questions. And I would say asking the people in the interviewer intelligent questions that can show that they have done the research. But I really loved the part about the closing statement more, because it shows like how you could do it. And one more thing, I liked about what you said was staging the whole interview, because people tell me that as as someone being interviewed, I don't think I have any control over the process. But I tend to disagree here, because I say that your responses to known questions are definitely going to be steering the interview in the way that you want. And if you're smart about it, you are going to be in a position to convey everything you wanted to tell them. Maybe it's not in the way you envisioned, but it's going to be at different places, and you will have the moments to bring up an example of leadership, or bring up an example of how you went through a tough time but still made it, and so on. So
Mhm.
yeah, that was great about staging part.
No, I think it's so true. And, also the virtual handshake, I would call it, where if in person, when you do a handshake, you make it strong, and that's your kind of first impression. So when you don't have that on the virtual interview, you've got to overly smile. So, not to where it seems fake, but you can't do a handshake. So you have to show that you're warm through smiling. And so if you're not a natural smiler, you need to practice because we can't see the rest of your body language. We can't see that you're interested. So, practice that kind of virtual smiling and what I would call kind of virtual eye contact. And then also break the ice. And whether you're in person or virtual, I love it when candidates say things like, "Oh, how are you doing today?" When we log on before we get started with the interview, "How are you doing today?" "Oh, I heard today in DC you're getting pummeled with snow. How's that going?" So whatever it is, if the candidate takes the initiative to break the ice, it's a nice touch. So.
I'm putting up a couple of our colleagues' comments here. Farrell before said the background shouldn't be louder than your words. So that makes sense. Disco balls can tend to be like very flashy. And Marlena has said an applicant definitely has control over the closing statement, and it's the candidate's change to reiterate the key points, which I think is, when it's practiced, it sounds good, right? You can bring that warmth to it. This is what actors do all the time.
Yep.
So it's, that's even probably a valuable tip too. Like if you don't feel comfortable, like if you feel socially awkward or you're not great in interviews, take an improv class, right? Or do something so that you can come forward the way that you want to be presented. If you don't feel that you're presenting yourself that way. And if you practice with somebody else and they give you that candid feedback, like, yeah, that was a little stiff, or that wasn't very warm, or that felt offhand, or that was kind of bitchy, then you can actually work on it, right? Because we can't always see ourselves and how we present. We might think we're the cat's meow, speaking of the cats on the keyboard. But you can get those tools, and these tools are going to be valuable, not just for the interview, but for school, with your colleagues, professionally in life. I always talk about how going to business school is it's a microcosm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way for you to refine who you want to be in the world. And so you can take the opportunity to better yourself in that process. So if someone doesn't feel the interview went well, then what would you recommend them do after that, if anything?
It's interesting. So I guess if they felt like they didn't maybe answer a question well, or they weren't able to, articulate basically answers to the question, on occasion, I've had applicants email afterwards to say, "I know you asked me this question. I didn't feel that I articulated my response well enough." And then, they give me a short little paragraph about it. I can probably, though, count on two hands in 12 years of doing this when that has happened. I will say though, sometimes always applicants will follow up with an email with a thank you, reiterating their interest. Very rarely I feel though that candidates really bomb an interview. I mean, I say, so I'm struggling through answering your question because, I feel like interviews are on a bell curve where, let's say there's 5 or 10% of applicants that are phenomenal. You walk out of the interview with chills because they were phenomenal. And on the other side, maybe only 5% that fall on the extreme of not phenomenal. I hate to use negative words, but they didn't do well.
Less than phenomenal.
Less than phenomenal. I would say 80 to 90% of people fall in the good category. If you've made it to the interview stage, in general, you have what it takes. And so I'm struggling to answer your question because very rarely has it been such a bomb interview that I get then a lot of people that email saying, oh, I just don't think it went well. Here's all the answers of how I could have done better. So, yeah.
And to probably phrase it a little bit differently, would you say that you've definitely seen people who have not answered questions, but still you don't think that that's like bombing the interview, right? So they need not answer like 100% of the questions that are asked of them. And still you will feel that, yeah, it wasn't too bad.
I think this is a savvy interview kind of skill where you should acknowledge and answer the question, but also you can provide, if you can really understand the interviewer's intent, then you can supplement answering the question with additional information that hopefully gets at what the interviewer was asking. So that's one thing. The other thing is make sure you did understand the question that they were asking, because interviewers are human. Like, we're human. Sometimes we phrase things in not a great way. I mean, like, I can definitely tell you over 13 years, I've sometimes asked an interview question where in my head I'm saying, what did I just ask? Or that didn't make sense. So we're all human. Just ask us to clarify. So what did you mean by that? Can you explain? Did you actually mean to ask me that? So just have a conversation, but don't not acknowledge the question that was asked. This is especially important, I would say, if English is not your native language. Part of the interview is assessing your English language ability. And so if we ask a few questions for which we are not getting the answer to the question, our thought is, did you memorize an answer just to memorize the answer? And so then we think, well, maybe you didn't understand the question, or maybe you can't think enough quickly on your feet in English to answer the question that we asked. So that's really important, especially if you're a non-native English speaker, and especially if you're in a virtual interview as well.
We have a question from Farrell. If most interview well, does it have much bearing on the process?
Great question. So if we have this kind of the middle 80, 90th percentile that do well, then then you're and you've already made it to the interview stage, then you're good. If you're in that 5% that did less than well on the other end of the bell curve, it can have a huge impact. Like, in that, no matter what your GPA or GMAT is, if that interview was not good, you can be put on the wait list or not admitted. Because at the end of the day, we don't care about all the other stuff if you're going to show up as not a great community member or cohort member. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you do really well, they can have a huge impact on your scholarship potential, right? So even if you have average scores, like you're kind of average on everything else, but you knock it out of the park on a great interview, absolutely. Because when when we have chills coming out of the interview, oh my gosh, like those people that you walk out of your office saying, this person was amazing, let me tell you all the things about it. then when I'm in admissions committee or that student's in admissions committee, you're able to say this, we want this candidate in the classroom. This is absolutely a candidate that Georgetown wants. And so that can weigh in heavily on scholarship decisions, I would say.
That makes a lot of sense. It's making me think. I wonder, as we look at some of the political leaders that went to business school, I'd love to see some of the notes from the interviews that they had, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I wonder what people said about them in those rooms.
Yeah.
I think that'd be interesting. Is there anything else that you would recommend that we didn't cover today that you think would be a valuable point of information for folks who, like, even for all of these tech folks that have been laid off that are going to be potentially entering the business school application pool? Like, are you thinking about different ways to interview them?
Yeah. So, this is a good question. I mean, it's similar to 2020, although not similar and different, and with massive layoffs, right? Business school is a great place to land, right? And we as admissions interviewers and admissions professionals, we know what's happening. We know people in fantastic jobs who have great profiles are getting laid off. So don't be afraid to come to us and say, look, yes, I was laid off. And it was unfortunate, but this is a good time for me to break and come back to business school and think about what's next. So, again, realize that we're human. If there are gaps or inconsistencies or weaknesses on your application, just explain them to us. If you feel the need to in the interview, most schools have optional essays where you can just explain an optional essay. So if you don't want to go negative in the interview, which is also a good strategy, don't necessarily need to bring it up. But if you got recently laid off, that's probably part of your why an MBA answer, right? I was recently laid off and I've thought about my options. I've thought about, do I go back into tech, or maybe this is a good time for me to take a beat and go to business school and see what else is out there. Business school, in particular MBA programs, I think 84% of our incoming class this past year either switched functions or industries. So it is a good transition point. So don't be ashamed of your weaknesses. Highlight them in an interview only if you think it's relevant to the questions being answered. Leave the rest of the optional essay. But yeah, we welcome you with open arms, and don't worry that we're coming on to round 3. Again, we've seen this in different recessions or different points, and we welcome you to apply.
Thanks. Great answer. Krithika, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I have just a quick question here on, Shelley, do you think round 2 interviews, or for that matter, round 3 or even round 1, are any different than the others?
I think when you get to the later rounds, we want to understand not why you just decided to apply, but in essence, why you did decide to apply. Is it that candidates didn't realize that MBA applications or business school applications are so early in the year? If you think about it, like, September is so early, it's a year out. Some people just don't know. Or is it that you are looking to make a transition in your career? So there is some, if you're being interviewed in later interviews, kind of explaining a little bit why you decided to apply in the later interview. It's not a bad thing, but just kind of why. But other than that, I mean, the process is the same. You will interview with the same type of people. The questions are very similar. I mean, we do try to hold constant our process throughout the rounds. So, the process will definitely be the same. I mean, the big thing is like the turnaround time. If you are admitted, you got to decide pretty quickly. Whereas round 1 and round 2, you have long window times to decide.
Are there any other logistic questions that the interviewee should consider, like the duration of time between them finding out they're doing an interview and the time that they have to prep for it? Is that
so different for every school? Obviously, at Georgetown, the way the process works is, we have the application deadline. We start reading the files. The time in which you are read is based on when you're pulled from the virtual stack of applications. So unlike other schools who maybe have like a very defined reading time, we are reading and then start inviting for interview. So we're reading and interviewing almost overlapping a little bit. It has no bearing on your candidacy being competitive. It's literally, if you can imagine a reader pulling from a virtual stack of applications, they read. If they want to invite you to interview, they invite you to interview. You are then given a link by which you can see available interview slots. We have them virtual. We have them on campus. In round 2, we are traveling to India and New York. So we will be doing some interviews in those markets. And then you could be interviewing with a member of the admission staff, as I think I mentioned earlier, like current students, alumni. They are typically 20 or 25 minutes, the interviews are, and then we give you 5 or 10 minutes to ask us questions. Definitely always come prepared with questions. I think there are a good number of times when students will say, well, I've already had my questions answered by your students, your alumni. I've talked with a lot of people on your staff. And in my head, I'm like, just ask me those same questions. Like, come with questions, even if you feel like you already know the answer. That's kind of an interview 101. So you'll sign up online for the interview. I would say it's typically, we show interview availability like 2 weeks out. So it's going to be kind of within 2 weeks that you would schedule an interview. We do have, though, upcoming interview days for consortium students, for women. So there are different ways to come on campus and engage with the broader community.
Great. Thanks. Well, that's all that we have for this episode. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you so much, Shelley, for joining us on your birthday.
Yay!
And Krithika, it's great to see you. Eric is going to join us next week. He was unable to join us this week, unfortunately. But we really appreciate all these tips and points and like getting into the weeds of interviews. And these are great tips for just regular interviews too. You know, disco ball, regular interview. Don't bring those, and don't wear the disco ball earrings unless it's really job specific, right?
Yep.
But it was such a pleasure to learn from your wisdom and experiences, both of you. And just want to reiterate that we're MBA Waves. Don't forget to check us out next week. I want to thank also our folks that are in the audience that shared with us, colleagues of ours who are admissions consultants. And don't forget to check us out next week, same bat channel, same bat time. And don't forget to email us if there's topics that you would like us to cover. And you can always reach us on mbawaves.com. So have a great rest of the week, everyone. And thank you so much again.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a great week.